Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 Minutes of Torah Study for the Torah portion of Shemos. So at this point, the Jewish people have been in the land of Egypt for 210 years. Of those 210 years, the past 86 years, the Jews have been suffering bitterly as slaves. However, a new phenomenon has developed. Pharaoh developed some type of skin illness, some type of rash. He consulted his doctors, his philosophers, his prophets, whatever you want to call them, and they gave him a prescription. You must bathe in the blood of Jewish children. So now is it not only that the Jewish people are slaves for 86 years, but Pharaoh is butchering Jewish babies, bathing in their blood, right? The Jewish people are just broken at this point. And at this point, who arrives on the scene? It is Moshe. He comes and he tells them, I have a message. God has heard your cry. Now is the time for your redemption. And the Jewish people are excited. The Jewish people are happy because they are so hopeful. They've been waiting to hear this message for so long. Moshe, together with his brother Aaron, they go to Pharaoh and they proclaim to Pharaoh, the time of the redemption for the Jewish people has arrived. Let my people go. Pharaoh looks at Moshe and he says, who? What? Where? Which God is this? Where exactly am I supposed to be sending these people to? This is called fantasy land. Says Moshe, I hope that you are not spreading this message amongst the Jewish people, giving them false hope. This is ridiculous. So Pharaoh says to Moshe, why, Moshe and Aaron, do you disturb the people? The people are slaves, the people are working, the people are busy. Don't give them all this narishkeit. And Pharaoh says to Moshe and Aaron, return to your labors. Now, there's something a little bit confusing about this particular line over here. Moshe and Aaron were from the tribe of Levi, right? They were Leviim. The Leviim were not slaves. They were not slaves at all. What's the background? The process with which Pharaoh enslaved the Jewish people took some time, right? He got the Jewish people to work, ultimately became forced labor. However, there was one tribe that resisted the entire time, would not go to work, would not become enslaved by Pharaoh. That's the tribe of Levi. Why? Because we read in last week's Torah portion that when Yaakov passed away, he was buried in Israel. However, his son Levi was not a pallbearer. Levi did not carry the casket. Levi did not carry the coffin. Why? Because it says that Levi is destined to carry the holy vessels in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan. Therefore, he would not carry the coffin. So therefore, the tribe of Levi said, we who are destined to carry the holy items of the Mishkan are not going to be carrying the bricks, the mortar for Pharaoh in Egypt. And you know what? Pharaoh went along with it. The tribe of Levi would not submit to him, and he went along with it. Now, why? Why would he go along with it? So the Ramban writes, it is the custom of every nation to have wise people who preserve and pass on the nation's heritage. Pharaoh released the tribe of Levi from bondage so they could serve as the wise men and elders of the people, and this was all orchestrated by God in heaven. So the Ramban makes quite an interesting suggestion. Pharaoh understood and recognized the value of a priestly class. We know from the Torah portion of Vayigash that when Yosef orchestrated the restructuring of the Egyptian economy, so they would not all die as a result of the famine, all of the land in Egypt was sold to Pharaoh, except for the priests. The priests were allowed to maintain their own independence and their own land, and weren't part of the restrictions that the rest of the society had to have. So Pharaoh recognized that the Jewish people need to have their own priestly class. Why? Maybe he thought that if the Jewish people would have their own culture or would have some type of relationship and connection to their priests, maybe they'd be happier slaves. If you take away everything that a slave has, maybe that's just too debilitating. You're not going to get the best work out of them. It's too depressing. Have a priestly class as well, a connection to their spirituality, a connection to their faith. Maybe happier slaves, he's going to get more work out of them. However, the Ramban concludes that at the end of the day, this is all a divine plan. Because of the fact that there was a tribe of Levi that was committed, dedicated to Torah, mitzvah, spirituality, and were not enslaved, that really did keep the flame alive. The spark of Judaism was there and present. So therefore, when Moshe returned, Moshe being from the tribe of Levi, his brother Aaron being from the tribe of Levi, their sister Miriam being from the tribe of Levi, they were not slaves, right? They were able to continue and pass the message of inspiration to the Jewish people. But if this is the case, that Moshe and Aaron are from the tribe of Levi, who were not enslaved, what is the message of Pharaoh's statement to them? Go back to your work. What work? They were not slaves. They did not have such a job. So what was it that Pharaoh was trying to communicate? So we're going to look at two answers. Rashi gives one answer. Rashi says, what does it mean when he says, go back to your labors? What he's essentially saying is, go home. Don't bother me, right? Why are you still standing in front of me? Leave the palace, go home, do your own thing. Whatever you do from 9 to 5, Moshe, whatever you do from 9 to 5, Aaron, that is where you should go, right? Don't bother me, go home. This is not your place. Rabbeinu Bechaya has a slightly different approach, right? Rabbeinu Bechaya says, Pharaoh was so upset about Moshe and Aaron coming there to tell him to let my people go, he actually made them slaves. And he said, go back to work. You think life is good, you're free, you can march around the palace and they let my people go? No, I'm going to show you who's in charge, and I'm going to put you in chains. Rabbeinu Bechaya says, ultimately, that did not last long because Moshe and Aaron were leaders amongst the Jewish people from the tribe of Levi, so they were immediately released. But Pharaoh was literally going to put them back to work to be fully slaves. Now let's try to translate this exchange into modern language. What was Pharaoh communicating to Moshe and Aaron? The Rashi style approach was that Pharaoh was saying to Moshe, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. This is not your business. This has nothing to do with you. You are a rabbi, you are a spiritual leader, you are a scholar, you are a prophet, you are a mystic. Stay in your lane. This is not your business. Don't have anything to do with this. Rabbeinu Bechaya, what was he saying? Moshe, Pharaoh, you want to get involved? You want to get involved with your brothers and sisters who are slaves? Currently, you're from the tribe of Levi, you're not a slave? I'll get you involved. I'm going to make you a slave. You want to get involved with this dispute? You're going all in. Another way of saying this is, according to Rashi, Pharaoh was saying, you need to stay away, be totally out. According to Rabbeinu Bechaya, I'm going to make you totally go in. In other words, there's two approaches as to how Moshe could react to his brothers as being slaves. Either you're in or you're out. Now, what's the message for us from this exchange, the question and forth, the back and forth? So let's explore this conversation a little bit further. The way that the Lubavitcher Rebbe looks at this conversation between Pharaoh and Moshe is, what did Pharaoh mean when he said to Moshe, stay in your lane? He meant, you are a rabbi. You are a scholar. You have faith, not a problem. But that does not work in the real world. You want to do your Torah, you want to do your mitzvahs, you want to pray to God, you want to do your Jewish stuff? Fabulous. Do your Jewish stuff at home. Do your Jewish stuff in the shul. Don't come to my palace with your religious stuff, because the palace is the real world. Slavery, that's the real world. Religion and the real world don't mix. They don't mingle. You want to do your thing, not a problem. Do your thing at home, but when it comes to the real world, it doesn't belong and it's not going to work. The Rebbe comments, Pharaoh was a very wise man, and he had a strong logical argument. By every natural consideration, the Jews had no hope of being liberated from Egypt. As our sages stated, no slave could escape from Egypt. Moreover, this state of bondage was also consistent with God's heavenly decree, for God had decreed that the Jews would remain in Egypt for 400 years, and only 210 years had elapsed. This was Pharaoh's argument. Why do you set out to change both nature and God's wishes? Go to your labor, go study Torah, and let the question of Jewish bondage be resolved by the world's natural pattern. Pharaoh says to Moshe, you think the Jewish people are leaving? Impossible. There's no way. No Jew has ever escaped. No Jew could ever escape. I run the show. I'm the boss. I'm in perfect control. We have the manpower. According to nature, it will not happen. It's not going to happen. You're giving me a religious argument? We know there's a tradition the Jews will be slaves for 400 years. They're only in Egypt for 210. There is no way, there's no method for it to happen. According to every rule within nature that we know of and are aware of, it's not going to happen. You want to do your faith, your hope, your spirituality, do that at home. Do me a favor, he says, do that at home. That does not belong here at all. Moshe completely and totally rejected the argument. Pharaoh's argument, religion and reality don't mix. You can do one or the other. You want to do religion, great, but it's something for home. It's not going to mix in the real world. You want to be in the real world? Religion does not belong here. What does Moshe say? Moshe says there's only one world because there's only one God. Everything in this world comes from God, is controlled by God, and whatever God wants is going to happen. There's no contradiction between religion and reality in any way, shape, or form. And he says to Pharaoh, if God said, let my people go, then that is exactly what is going to happen. Reality cannot get in the way, and you ultimately cannot get in the way. This was something that Moshe wasn't taught. Intuitively, Moshe felt this, had a sense of this, and understood this very deeply. In this week's Torah, we read about Moshe's birth. And the Torah says, and the woman conceived and gave birth to a son, and she saw that he was good. What does it mean that he was good? He was cute, right? All babies are cute. All mothers think their kids are cute. What does it mean? The Zohar explains with two interpretations. Moshe was born circumcised. She saw that he was born circumcised. That means his flesh, his body, his physical existence was so refined that he was circumcised. And it gives a second interpretation. The house was shining. There was light that was emanating from this boy that illuminated and filled the house. What do these two things mean? He was born circumcised, perfect. He was head and shoulders above and beyond everyone else. Spiritually, he was a giant. He was literally physically born circumcised. What does it mean that light was shining from him? That means his entire existence was to help another person, to give light to another person, to care for another person. Since he was born, this is who Moshe was. The Rebbe comments, being born circumcised speaks of his personal perfection and transcendence. Such births are not natural. It tells us that he was completely irradiated by his godly soul without the hindrance of a foreskin or evil inclination. In other words, Moshe was spiritual, religious. He was the perfection of every spiritual and religious ideal in the flesh. That's who Moshe was. The fact that God's light filled the house upon his birth indicated that he would share his rare light and teachings with the Jews in particular and with the world at large. So despite his spirituality, Moshe was not the man isolated from society who lived on a mountain who did not connect with the world. He was all about light, fully immersed within the world, within the culture, to benefit and to help all those who were around him. So while Pharaoh thought there was two worlds, two domains of life, two domains of existence, the spiritual, the physical, there's the religious, and then there's reality, Moshe lived in both of them. Moshe combined both of them, because Moshe recognized that ultimately it's all one. The Torah tells us that Moshe grew up twice. 2 different times in the Parsha does the Torah tell us that Moshe grew up. Why? Rashi explains. Rabbi Huda, the son of Eli, said, the first is for growth in spiritual height. The second is for growth in worldly stature. For Pharaoh appointed him a lord over the royal palace. Spirituality, religion. Worldly, reality. For Moshe, one and the same. This was his home. Again, the Rebbe comments, Moshe encompassed both traits. His personal perfection, his attachment and oneness with God, this was the transcendental mode. In Rashi's words, the first is for growth and height. Moshe encompassed both traits, as we said. B, his perfect ability to share with others in the lower world. In Rashi's words, the second is for growth and stature, for Pharaoh appointed him lord over the royal palace. Again, from Moshe's perspective, there's one God. That means everything in the world emanates from God. It does not matter how big the obstacle in the physical world appears to be. It does not matter how big and powerful Pharaoh is. It doesn't matter. There's one God, which means everything and anything can happen ultimately from Hashem. Therefore, he said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Now, let's apply this approach to life today in the year 2023. It appears that religion and reality are at conflicts, they are at odds. A person can choose to live a religious, spiritual life, but that's for Jerusalem. That's for New York, right? Maybe some places in Miami and LA as well. But it's not for the real world. It's not for Milwaukee. It's not going to work, right? In the real world, Shabbos, kosher, it doesn't work. It doesn't happen. If you want to live in an isolated Jewish community, fine. You have to choose one. Either you embrace the spiritual religious life, or you got to embrace the physical material reality of life. You can't be in both places. It simply is not going to work. It doesn't happen. You have to choose one. The Rebbe says, based on what we're seeing here, what is the result of choosing one? Choosing one is the same thing as being in a boat and drilling a hole right under one seat and say, oh, what's the problem, right? The hole is only under my seat, right? It's not under your seat. It's not under anyone else's seat. Is that going to be a very strong argument? No, right? There is no such thing as drilling a hole under one seat. You drill a hole under one seat, the whole ship is going down. Similarly, it's not possible to choose one. If you choose one, the whole thing is going to leak. The whole thing is not going to work. The whole thing is not going to be productive. What do I mean by that? Let's try to apply this thinking to a very practical, real-world challenge. Imagine there is a person who is a philanthropist. Now, I don't necessarily mean a Bill Gates. I'm talking a person who gives tzedakah, who gives charity on a regular basis. But then the stock market goes down, the income is less, a few business deals fall apart, and suddenly you do not have the financial capacity to give the way you gave in the past. Should you still give? Religion facing reality. What do you do? So here we have a letter from the Rebbe responding to a question exactly like this. Oh, what just happened here? Somehow we have some stuff was skipped. It seems like a few slides were erased. Okay, you're good. I don't know how this happened. Some slides were deleted. We will do it orally here. The Rebbe writes, in response to your letter about your wonderful 37-year custom to tithe from your earnings to charity, you write that you expect a deduction in your future earnings, in which case you will be unable to tithe. You ask how to proceed, whether you must seek an annulment from your presumed commitment to continue to tithe. This is most surprising. Why would you ask this question? when the best possible outcome and the wisest course of action is to continue your wonderful custom and demand that God, the creator of the world and the orchestrator of its affairs, enable you to do so with peace of mind, good health, joy, and gladness of heart. I conclude with a blessing for good tidings about all the above. If the world of religion and reality were two competing interests, when reality, your income, comes up against religion, tzedakah, right, one of them is going to have to bow to the other one, right? It simply cannot coexist. What does the Rebbe say? We're not dealing with two worlds. There is a one reality and one reality only. Therefore, the spiritual cannot contradict the physical. The spiritual cannot hurt the physical. It's simply impossible to do so because at the end of the day, there's only one world, one God, no contradiction. I want to demonstrate this to you with a 2-minute video clip, okay? Hopefully this is going to work. All right, hold on a second. We're going to make this happen here. Okay. Can you see this on the screen here? Yes, you can see it on the screen. So just to give you a little bit of a background to the story, I really don't need to give you any background. Watch the video, 2 minutes, and then we'll comment and explain.
There was a Verbringenes Yutes Kislev, and the Rebbe had told people to write an amount of money on a piece of paper, fold over the paper, and write their name on the outside of the paper, pass it up front.
in dem Minion von dem Schikon. In Tag Desho, als Bechlau mein Seder, ich mich nicht, wie viel jeder geht, ist mich, die gar nicht, ich nehme ich zu, oder ich bin zufrieden, oder ich bin nicht zufrieden, und also bis mir jetzt nicht. Als wie das ich Bechlau, in a Jetze min a Klau, wenn ich sein a Jetze min a Geder, und a Jetze min a Klau, und komme ich sich mir reisweisen, aber mir geht zu wenig, in sich mich dann abschämen und heißen jenen mäßig sein, mich dann wie es bei mir ist.
So my father pledged more than he could give, and the Rebbe said to increase the pledge by a certain sum.
Wirklich ist ein bisschen vertun geworden. Bisschen vertun geworden. Da wie da ist zehnmal sehr viel.
He came home, I believe it was Norwalk, late at night, and he told my mother what happened. So my mother said, you know, of course, you must immediately pay it. My father went to a bank in New Haven. He got a loan, much to everybody's surprise, and he immediately, as soon as he got the loan, just paid off the pledge to the Rebbe before Shabbos.
Und als der Tui nach dort der Linie von Aljera Lewowka bezieht Chalei, in dem wo die Midot ist ala Kodesh Baruch Hu, dass Mida keneged Mido, ist nicht nur mit Gitem oder die alle Unionen, was wir dürfen geben, nur mit Gitas noch Besimchu, Tuvli Wov, das ist ohne Ravani und ohne Schwierigkeiten und ohne Halomet Vestenim.
Soon afterwards, one of the factories he had contacts with had a fire, and he was able to buy materials at a very low price. They made more money in one truckload that they sold at that time than they made in my father's hard work of weeks and weeks of working.
Der Aljera Lewowka bezieht Chalei, in dem geht ein die Parnose für sich mit dem Nebais, mit der Sach mehr hat Loche und mit der Sach mehr Broche, sei begashmi, sei beruchni.
I want to expand on that story just a little bit here. So this David Deitch is my brother-in-law Levi's grandfather. This is a Farbrengen, 1957. And the Rebbe says we have to expand Kfar Chabad, right? Kfar Chabad village in Israel, there were refugees coming out from Russia, we need to expand. And the Rebbe says, usually I don't mix in with how much people give. I just say thank you. But this time, if I think you can give more, I'm going to tell you. And at the Farbrengen, everyone writes down on a piece of paper how much they're giving in their name, right? David Deitch wrote down, if I'm not mistaken, because I have a book from his family which tells the whole story, I believe it was $3,000. Okay, $3,000 in 1957 is a very significant donation. He did not have it at that time. He could not afford it, but the Rebbe said push, he wrote push. Did you hear what the Rebbe said? It's recorded right there. I just played it for you. The Rebbe said, David Deitch, 10 times that amount. Could you even imagine? You don't have the three. And the Rebbe tells you that. Immediately he went to the bank, he mortgaged his house, and he mortgaged the warehouse. He took a second mortgage on the warehouse where his business was in, and that week he gave a check to the Rebbe. Just after that, there was a warehouse in Boston of a company that he had done some business with, had a fire. The company wanted to clear out all their merchandise because they had to do a lot of rebuilding. He bought it for pennies on the dollar. He made so much profit off of that. Within 2 months, he gave the Rebbe a second check for $30,000. A second check, right? Not only did he borrow the ticket, not only did he make back the 30, he made back enough to give the Rebbe a second check for $30,000, right? Because religion and reality cannot conflict. One cannot hurt each other. Ultimately, you know who's the biggest banker? God is the biggest banker. You stretch yourself for God, he's going to stretch yourself for you. Do what's uncomfortable. Go out of your comfort zone, and the money is going to come straight back to you. Another story, right? When I was in yeshiva in Sydney, Australia, I used to, on a regular basis, eat by the house of Robert Kremnizer. Lubavitcher Chassid, very successful lawyer in Sydney, Australia, a swimming pool, tennis court, the whole deal. Fabulous people. His son was one of my study partners. And one Shabbos, he tells us that he purchased an apartment building, 1988, in Sydney, Australia, for $250,000. And he comes to his wife and he says, look, this great property that we just acquired, what are we going to do with it? And his wife says, either him or his wife said that the year is 1988. The Rebbe said it's called Shnas HaBinyan, the year of building. Whoever builds and expands and does something will not lose anything from it. Build and expand. I want to make one of these apartments into a Chabad house. There's a lot of Russian immigrants coming into Australia. Let's make a Chabad house for Russians in the apartment. His wife says to him, Robert, what are they going to do with one apartment? You have to give the whole building. And he's floored. $250,000, you're going to give the whole building? You crazy? Right? His wife says to him, or it could be the rabbi said to him, either way, the Rebbe said, you give the tzedakah, you're not going to lose one penny. He said the next day he goes into his office. Real estate developer from New Zealand comes into his office. He had not seen him in 10 years. They had done some business 10 years before. They formed a company together that Robert Kremnizer had shares in. And he says to him, I need to buy back those shares in order to be able to have full control of the business. Right? Robert Kremnizer says to him, oh yeah, $250,000. He took out his pocketbook on the spot, $250,000, no questions asked. And the money was paid back, right? What did Moshe say to Pharaoh? There's not two worlds. It doesn't matter how big the obstacle appears to be. At the end of the day, there is one God and there's only one world. It doesn't matter the challenges we face. It doesn't matter the obstacles we face. We have faith and trust in Hashem. Hashem is the biggest banker, the biggest doctor, right? The biggest anything that you could possibly imagine. We do what we got to do. God's going to do what he has to do. Religion and reality cannot conflict. Right, there's two things I want to share here before we conclude. All right, number one. Okay, this Shabbos we have our scholar in residence. We have a phenomenal community Friday night dinner. Shlomi Zion's Tales of a Hasidic YouTuber in Arabia. He has traveled to 41 countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, some of the countries that you would not imagine a Hasidic Jew walking around in. He has phenomenal stories, interesting experiences, and an uplifting, powerful message about Jewish pride. He's speaking at the dinner Friday night and as well at the Kiddush and Shabbos day. Great time to come to Shul. You could RSVP for the dinner online. For Shul Shabbos day, just come, show up, join us at the Kiddush. The next thing I want to point out is that the next JLI course is beginning on February 1st, 6 Wednesdays, 7:30 to 9 in person and on Zoom. And I think this really, really is a very valuable course, because what we are going to do is to explore all the various genres of Torah. You have Talmud, Jewish law, Medrash, Chassidus, Musar, Kabbalah. What are these things? Who wrote them? So we are going to explore the background of these genres, how they work, who wrote the most important books, and we're going to demonstrate concrete examples of what all of these genres of Jewish literature are. So you're going to be able to learn about all the most important elements in Talmud, Jewish law, Kabbalah, Chassidus, Medrash, right, Musar, all of these texts, where they came from, how they work, how they operate, and we'll actually get to experience some of them as well. So please check it out. More information is available on the website. This is a course you don't want to miss, and you will really enjoy it tremendously.